From winning the Carabao Cup,
the winners are Newcastle United,
to their star player asking to leave.
Breaking news, Alexander Isak has communicated to Newcastle management his concrete desire to explore a move away from the club.
From getting Champions League football,
20 long years, but Newcastle will be playing in the Champions League again next season,
to missing out on Šeško.
We understand there's now a growing feeling the RB Leipzig striker wants to join Manchester United in what could be another major blow to Newcastle's striker search.
From picking up Elanga and Ramsdale to being rejected by every one of their other targets, Newcastle are a story on their own. They have a fantastic manager, a great squad, and a very promising project. Yet for whatever reason, nobody wants to join them. If rejections were trophies, they would be at the top of the table. So what the hell is happening at Newcastle? Newcastle's transfer window is like me on Tinder. Swipe right on everyone, then get left on scene. They were interested in Cunha, he picked United. They were interested in Mbeumo, same result. They wanted Šeško, and once again, the pattern continued. And that's just Newcastle targets that went to United. They also missed out on Ekitike, Delap, and Trafford. The Trafford situation was definitely annoying for fans because the keeper had been reportedly desperate to join the club for like a year. According to the Telegraph, Newcastle had a deal worth £20 million in place to sign the England under-21 international, only for the plug to be pulled shortly after Paul Mitchell was appointed as sporting director over 12 months ago. The club had been willing to improve that offer to £25 million in the 2025 summer window, but Burnley had been holding out for £40 million following their return to the Premier League.
Burnley have rejected a £27 million offer from Newcastle United for the goalkeeper James Trafford.
Then the negotiations reached a stalemate, and then Man City, who negotiated a 20% sell-on clause when they sold them to Burnley in 2023, swooped in and signed them. Now Newcastle ended up signing Ramsdale instead, but that saga gave a peek into what the club had been dealing with all window. They're aiming high, shopping for players who can help them immediately both in the Champions League and the Premier League. But the problem is, every time they go after these elite players, they end up losing out.
Why is it so difficult? Because they've won their first trophy in 70 years, they're in the Champions League, Newcastle's a fantastic place. Why can't they get people in?
And that's because the competition, it's brutal. There aren't that many world-class players out there, and those who are available, there's big clubs chasing them. Those big clubs can offer more money, have a more famous name, and come with that big club reputation. Now, Newcastle fans, don't get mad at me, I know you are a big club. I've liked you since I watched the movie Goal. But in the eyes of the players, they're still drawn to Manchester and London. They see it as a bigger spotlight, clubs where they can have a bigger legacy. I get a player like Ekitike choosing Liverpool over Newcastle, but Mbeumo choosing Manchester United over Newcastle is still kind of crazy to me. United finished 15th and have a proven track record of making players worse. They have literally become a graveyard for careers. I get that the club still has a big name and stature from years of dominating, but still. The thing is that Manchester United make more money than Newcastle, so they can afford to pay higher wages. That's one of the reasons why Mbeumo turned down a move to the Northeast. Newcastle have a pretty strict wage limit, while joining a club like United also opens the door to bigger sponsorships and off-the-pitch deals. Back in the day, clubs like Chelsea, Man City, and even Blackburn Rovers made their name by splashing a lot of cash. Unfortunately, Newcastle can't do that right now. Even though they've got one of the richest owners in football, thanks to Saudi Arabia's PIF, the rules were changed to stop them from splashing big money. So now the club finds itself stuck. When they were trying to catch up to the top clubs, they made smart signings. Players with potential who could grow with the team. Guys like Isak, Tonali, and Bruno were great picks. But now they need ready-made stars. Players who can walk into a Champions League fixture and make a difference. That's the level they're at. But getting those kind of players is proving much harder, which is surprising given the fact that Newcastle had an amazing 2024-2025 season. I mean, look at what they did in March.
Big Dan Burn with the biggest goal he will ever score. And the black and white end of Wembley. Error hanging in the air. Murphy. Isak!
This is his moment of the match.
They painted Wembley black and white. At long, long last, Newcastle United are winners.
They turned Wembley black and white and beat Liverpool 2-1 to win the Carabao Cup, their first major trophy in 56 years. Yeah, it had been that long. Dan Burn got the party started with a powerful header just before halftime, thanks to a lovely corner from Kieran Trippier. Then right after the break, Alexander Isak smashed in a volley to make it 2-0. Liverpool scored late to make it interesting, but Eddie Howe's side held strong and brought the trophy home. Burn was the absolute hero that day, solid at the back and scoring a huge goal. He deservedly got man of the match. For Newcastle fans, it was pure joy. After decades of heartbreak and waiting, they finally had something to celebrate. This win wasn't just about a shiny cup, it was proof that Newcastle's rebuild was working. They had beaten Arsenal in the semis, and then had gone toe-to-toe with the best team in the country and came out on top. It showed the world and future signings that this team is serious. On top of finally lifting silverware, they also had a strong season in the Premier League. They finished 5th with 66 points, which was just enough to sneak into the Champions League, thanks to England getting an extra spot that year. It was a dramatic finish too. They edged out Aston Villa on goal difference on the final day. Both teams had the same points, but Newcastle's goal tally gave them the edge. This was their second Champions League qualification in 3 years, showing that it wasn't just some one-off moment. They had some big moments throughout the whole season. They slapped Crystal Palace 5-0. They beat Forest both home and away, which was actually quite impressive given how good Forest were in the 2025 season. They also beat Chelsea. And what really stood out was their consistency. Even when the pressure was on, they got the job done. Nobody thought they would qualify for Champions League football after the summer of 2024, where Newcastle went through the transfer window without a single first-team signing. They had finished 7th the season before, and a big reason for that was due to injuries and fatigue. So without increasing their depth, it seemed like they were destined for another mid-table finish. Then even throughout the 2025 season, nobody was really talking about them. All the topics of discussion were around Liverpool, Chelsea, Arsenal, and Man City. But then Newcastle went on a great run of form, and finally people started to take notice. That kind of mentality shows just how much the team has grown. And Champions League football is no small achievement. Wenger, for years, talked about how important it was, and people laughed at him.
You would rather finish second and lose the cup final than win the cup final and finish third?
Let's say I would rather achieve my first target first and then the second target. And the first target is to get in the Champions League.
Being able to participate in the most prestigious club tournament means more money, more attention, and more importantly, it's supposed to help you bring in better players. Every top player wants to play on that stage, and now Newcastle could offer it. Not only do you get Champions League football when you join Newcastle, but you also get to play with a fantastic squad. How many other clubs have a striker better than Alexander Isak? He scored 23 goals in the Premier League and 27 in all competitions. He is a number 9 that can create and score. Very composed in front of goal, fantastic on the ball, and is very intelligent with his movement off the ball. All of that was on display when he scored in the Carabao Cup final. But it wasn't just him carrying the load. Anthony Gordon and Harvey Barnes both added 9 goals each across all competitions. Jacob Murphy, who only became a regular starter towards the back end of the season, chipped in with a few goals and assists himself. Even Fabian Schär, who's a center back, was getting goals. Talk about doing it all. Then in midfield, Bruno Guimaraes ran the show. He got 5 league goals, while Tonali added 6 more across all competitions. So the team didn't just rely on 1 or 2 players. They got goals from everywhere and from everyone. Defensively, Newcastle were very tough to break down. The back line with Trippier, Schär, Dan Burn, and Tino Livramento held things together, and Nick Pope was pretty reliable in goal. They kept a good number of clean sheets throughout the season. The squad also had some depth. Players like Joe Linton, Joe Willett, and Sean Longstaff brought energy and flexibility when needed. The whole team really felt connected, and there was a strong sense of unity both on and off the pitch. Then on top of all this talent, Newcastle have one of the best managers in the league. Just compare where Newcastle were when Eddie Howe first joined and where they are now. The Magpies were still feeling the effects from Steve Bruce and Mike Ashley. They had only picked up 3 points in the first 7 games of the season, and the club was literally being destroyed in front of the fans' eyes.
It was all a bit of a mess.
Despite the large support the club receives in the Northeast, they were being suffocated by Mike Ashley's obsession with being mid. They had become a club filled with high manager turnover, a lack of ambition, and consistent underinvestment. It seemed like they were on the path to return to the championship again, but Eddie Howe completely changed the trajectory of the club. He was backed financially with Newcastle welcoming Bruno Guimaraes, Chris Wood, Dan Burn, Kieran Trippier, and Matt Targett in January of 2022. The Bruno signing was probably the most impactful, a marquee signing. A talented Brazilian midfielder who was in high demand across all of Europe, and he decided to join the Newcastle project. With new signings and a new manager, Newcastle ended up finishing 11th after a run of 12 wins in their last 18 games. They became the first team in Premier League history to avoid relegation after failing to win a single one of their first 14 games. The next season, Eddie Howe built on that momentum. Unlike Steve Bruce, Howe was able to create a stable system and environment for the team. He's a great man manager, able to make an emotional connection with the player. Not only was the team drastically performing better, but he was also getting more out of players that looked average under Steve Bruce. Big money had been spent on the likes of Joe Linton and Miguel Almiron, yet Steve Bruce had them playing relegation level football. Howe transformed Joe Linton from a striker into one of the best box-to-box midfielders in the league. He realized right away that the Brazilian's physicality and work rate was more suited for the center of the park, with him and fellow countryman Bruno Guimaraes making life miserable for opposing midfielders. Other players such as Jacob Murphy, Sean Longstaff, and Almiron all were playing above expectations. Almiron had one of his best statistical seasons, picking up 11 goals and 4 assists. Newcastle also continued to invest in top talent, and that's when they brought in Isak in the summer of 2022. Similar to Guimaraes, Isak was another statement signing. The Swede was a massive talent in La Liga, another player that many other clubs were after. They also picked up Gordon from Everton. It was clear what Newcastle's plan was. They were spending big, but they were doing it on young players who were good already, but had the potential to get even better. With the right investments combined with Eddie Howe's managerial masterclass, Newcastle shocked everyone, finishing 4th in the Premier League, clinching Champions League football in the 2023 season. Now they have clinched it again just a few years later. Backed by rich owners and with big investments in players and facilities, Newcastle's long-term plan is pretty clear: become one of the top clubs in Europe. And honestly, they're ahead of schedule. A few years ago, they were battling relegation. Now they've won a trophy and are heading back to the Champions League. With a passionate fan base, a clear vision, and a team full of talent, Newcastle should be becoming a club that top players want to join. But as the summer transfer window showed, it's not that simple. Despite their success on the pitch, the summer of 2025 proved to be very frustrating. The Magpies were linked with many high-profile players to strengthen their squad for Champions League football, but the majority of their transfer targets rejected them, even when the club was flying high. Now, I'll be honest, some of these so-called rejections are a bit of a stretch just so they can sell a narrative. I'm sure you guys have seen this photo of the starting 11 of players Newcastle missed out on. Now keep in mind, many of these players were never even officially approached by Newcastle. Pretty sure they never made an official bid for Housen or Cunha, and Gay is from the 2025 season. You can say the same thing for Delap. All the reports I saw just said that Newcastle were interested in him. The BBC said that they had a talk with him to convince him as well. But the point still stands that many people from the beginning made it clear that they were not interested in the Newcastle project. Look at Mbeumo. After a crazy good season where he got 20 goals and 7 assists for Brentford, he became one of Newcastle's top targets. He could slot in perfectly in that right wing spot. They really wanted him to boost their attack, but he picked Manchester United. Even though United finished 15th in the league, they could offer him more money, and it seems like Mbeumo had made up his mind early. Newcastle are limited by financial rules. Meanwhile, United basically said name your price. Similar thing happened with João Pedro. Newcastle had been trying to get the Brazilian since 2022, back when he was still at Watford. They went for him again at Brighton and offered about £50 million. But João Pedro had other ideas. He wanted Chelsea. Same story as Liam Delap. Chelsea got him, and Newcastle were left watching it happen again. Then Newcastle thought they had a shot at signing Ekitike from Frankfurt. They reportedly offered €70 million, but then Liverpool swooped in and stole him. And then on top of that, Liverpool have also been trying to sign Isak. Then you have the whole Šeško situation that definitely stinks. He is one of Europe's most exciting young strikers. Newcastle offered him Champions League football and regular first team football. Sounds pretty good, right? He still chose Manchester United. Why? Because United is still seen as a big club. Despite their poor results, their brand is still very strong, and as a result, prestige and money won again. Cunha was another top forward that Newcastle wanted, but the Brazilian chose United from the start. Basically an identical situation to Mbeumo. It became a pattern. Players were still picking traditional Big Six clubs over Newcastle, even though the other clubs were in bad shape. Then on top of new players rejecting them, Newcastle now have to deal with their own star wanting to leave. There had been rumors about Isak going to Liverpool for months, but many assumed that due to the Swedish striker being under contract, how well Newcastle were doing, and how much he would cost, that these were just rumors. But then Isak came out and publicly said that he wants to explore his options.
Alexander Isak has reportedly said he wants to leave the club.
This leaves the entire Newcastle project at a bit of a crossroad. He still has 3 years left on his contract, but there's a real chance that he could leave. Isak made it pretty clear that that's his decision, and Liverpool already made a big move for him, offering £110 million. Newcastle shut it down fast. They said nope, not for sale, but the Reds are expected to come back with an even bigger offer. So now the question is, do Newcastle stick to their guns and keep their star striker, or do they cash in and sell him to a rival? Selling Isak to another Premier League team, especially a team like Liverpool, does send a weird message. It would say we're still not on their level. It might even set a dangerous precedent. If other top clubs think Newcastle will sell their best players, they'll come knocking every time. Then replacing Isak is a nightmare, considering that Newcastle missed out on pretty much all of their attacking targets. Not to mention that none of those guys, even at their best, were better than Isak. It's hard to find players who score 20 plus goals in the Premier League like Isak did. Guys like that don't just grow on trees. There's also the question of whether Isak can even be brought back into the group now. Newcastle said that he had missed preseason because of a minor thigh injury, but fans noticed he was training alone in Spain with his old club Real Sociedad. That raised eyebrow. Why was this guy training by himself? Eddie Howe didn't hold back either. He recently said that no player can expect to act poorly and then train with the group as normal. It was a clear message. If Isak isn't all in, he's not going to be able to walk back into the team like nothing happened. The truth is Newcastle are now in the mix with the big boys, but a lot of people still see them as a small fish just in a bigger pond. Their wage bill is only the 8th highest in the league, and that's not expected to change anytime soon. Maybe they'll stay just ahead of Villa, but the real power gap between them and the traditional Big Six is still very massive, and that's mainly down to money and reputation. Money talks, just ask Bonnie Blue. And because of financial fair play rules, Newcastle can't go all out like others. Newcastle are doing everything right, but players still see them as like the new kids on the block. Even though they had an amazing season, winning their first trophy in decades and qualifying for the Champions League again, it still feels like they punched above their weight. And maybe players feel like they can't keep doing that forever. The 2025 summer transfer window was supposed to be a big leap. It was finally them spending to improve the quality and depth of their side. But instead they've hit a wall. Yes, they signed Anthony Elanga, who's a great piece to fill a long-time need on that right side, and they signed Ramsdale, but they still need way more. To make things even worse, they're dealing with a lot of drama behind the scenes. Their sporting director, Paul Mitchell, left in May. Their CEO, Darren Eales, had to leave because of a serious health problem, and no one's properly steering the ship. It's not a great setup for a club that wants to be the best. But you know what is the best? Getting your own Newcastle jersey at buygamejerseys.com. Use code PETTALKS at checkout. So yes, Newcastle are still ambitious, but now they've been forced to face an obstacle. They're struggling to sign the players they want because they can't match what other top clubs offer. Now that doesn't mean the project's failed, it just means they're not there yet. It's frustrating, especially when Newcastle are clearly on the rise. But the good news is, that's going to be changing soon. Another strong season in the league or a deep Champions League run could really shift the narrative around the club. For now though, they're building something special. And to see how far they've come, you have to check out this video right here.